kitchens across the country are beginning to resemble the cellars of old. Jars upon jars of goods bought at local markets. Closets, a curation of reclaimed band tees and Levi's. Today's consumers are waking up.
Single-use plastics are being systemically evicted from their wrongful thrones in the material economy, yet another victim of cancel culture. Fair trade labels are sprouting up on everything from Campbell's Chunky Soup to the recently announced Twinkies cereal. The 16th brand of locally brewed kombucha is hitting the market, a desperate attempt to capture the woke demographic.
With whom does the blame lie?
Corporations or consumers?
Today, this age-old debate hits the environmental podcast. Anyway.
Okay, today we are debating personal responsibility versus corporate responsibility, specifically when it comes to matters of the environment and in being environmentally friendly. So I think a good place to start is to define those two terms. What do we think is personal responsibility?
Personal responsibility is the responsibility of a consumer, I think, to make a responsible choice when they go to the market if they're going to buy something that's local or something that is produced by a large corporation. It's their responsibility to make lifestyle changes, maybe go vegetarian, maybe stop driving their car and instead ride their bike, all of that jazz.
Yes, and corporate responsibility, I mean, these two things are kind of just like two different mindsets about where we're assigning blame and responsibility for
environmental degradation.
Yeah, environmental degradation. So some people will say corporations need to do more. I'm sick of these big companies pouring effluent into lakes and littering the shelves with single-use plastics and all these things. And some people will say, well, actually, it's our jobs as citizens and consumers to shape that narrative.
Yeah.
So, and the way, I guess, the corporate responsibility is stuff like how they stop using plastic straws and plastic bags and things like that.
It's basically the fact that the responsibility shouldn't be on the consumer, it should be on the corporations, so people don't have to look into what they're eating. There shouldn't be garbage in it. This debate originally sparked up when people were really mad about trans or saturated fats, I think.
Okay.
So it was it shouldn't be on the people to know what this is and that it causes incredibly bad diseases. Corporations were responsible for just not putting it in because they're more likely to know that it's bad than people. So it's
right.
That's kind of
the
debate.
Today we're not going to we'll come to a conclusion of some sorts.
This is going to be an ongoing discussion though because it's a big one.
Yes.
Cool. So where should we start? Just one industry?
Well, I guess we just start with our own testimonies.
Okay.
Because recently we wanted to do this episode on personal responsibility because Alicia is going vegan.
That's a lie. Unfortunately, I can't eat gluten. And so if I was to go vegan right now, I wouldn't be able to eat much. But maybe someday.
But we've been having the discussion about meat eating.
Yes.
We should say that because there are some very convincing documentaries that I've been watching about the meat industry, its emissions, not even getting into health stuff. I mean, we're probably not the best two people to be discussing vegetarianism in a dietary, nutritious sense, so we probably won't do that.
No, but just our own choices.
Yeah, we're just going to give macro opinions on things.
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to meat, neither of us really eat beef.
Oh yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
When we were okay, we have to make a choice. What are we going to eat as sustainably minded people?
Sure.
It's
well, speak for yourself.
Well, personally, we were probably given in class or looked it up which type of animal protein emits the most. And besides lamb, which you don't really eat, I've never had it, beef was the next biggest emitter. So it was but it was by a huge margin compared to chicken and fish and such. So it was by stopping eating beef, if you don't eat one hamburger, it's taking a car off the road for a year or something. I can't remember. But it's a really big impact on the environment, just one portion of meat. And people, even me in meal hall was offered every day. Didn't eat it every day, but I mean
right.
It's in every day meals.
Yeah, it's probably the most widely eaten food in North America, or meat in North America.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
chicken might be.
I don't know. It's a guess.
I don't know. Anyway.
It's a cultural staple, let's say that.
Yes.
The hamburger, the steak. That's about it.
The taco.
Okay.
I don't know where I was going. Oh yeah, personal. So I don't eat beef for like environmental reasons. Dairy as well, like mainly just cow products.
Okay.
Because they emit so much. Like the whole cycle of them growing, grazing, they have to cut down trees to create grazing land, and then when they graze it and when they digest, it releases a lot of methane into the atmosphere, which is way more negatively impactful than carbon, which we know is really bad.
You're right.
So yeah, that's my biggest thing regarding the environment and diet. Regarding purchases, I often try to make ethical purchases, but I am a broke student.
What do you mean ethical?
Ethical, well, mainly, this isn't environmental, I guess, but it usually has pretty close ties. If something's made in a sweatshop, it usually isn't being made considering, like if you're dyeing blue jeans, a ton of water is needed. You need like thousands of gallons of water, which is then polluted and usually just pumped back into streams to make a pair of blue jeans to dye the cotton. And so it's like, that's just so bad for the environment. I try and make purchases, big purchases, like a new pair of jeans, where I know the whole process, know it was made locally or at least in North America and not made using child labor, because that really isn't fair. Those are the two big consumer choices that people make, I think.
Fashion and diet.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about you, Aaron? What are your...
Well, also thrifting a lot, right?
I do go to the
That's a
thrift
big
stores
deal
a lot.
because it essentially has no impact. Is that right? Except what you then subsequently use for washing the clothes, I guess. The water and the energy and stuff.
Yeah, probably has like an overall positive impact because you're keeping it out of the landfills, plus not buying something else off the shelves.
Maybe, but isn't it eventually going to the landfills?
At some point, probably.
You're delaying the process.
Delaying it, but it's I think fashion has the most potential to be a very circular
a very closed
industry.
Loop industry.
Because like even if a pair of jeans is torn to shreds, it probably can be broken down and reused to make a new pair of jeans. I don't know for sure, but I feel like has the most potential. Food is like you can't buy second-hand food. Yeah,
but doesn't food all like compost?
Yeah, true. So I guess.
But I think even that process emits. Someone was telling me. The process of composting. Obviously, it's good because you're recycling.
So food waste is the biggest issue.
Food waste is a big issue, yeah.
Yeah, that's massive. Like, oh shoot, I read something about it yesterday. It was like, what was it? It's 42% of all food produced is wasted, and then 32% of that waste. Some of it is like necessary. It's like the bones and just like the shells of stuff. But 32% of that 42% can potentially be reclaimed and used to create other foods. So it might just be if an apple is kind of ugly, a supermarket won't carry it, but it still has the potential to be eaten.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if expired foods go into that category.
You're not a big fan of expiration dates.
Oh no, I think it's a myth.
Yeah, I think it is. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, why at this date?
Anyway, moving on. Anyway, so yes, the question is, should consumers have to be incredibly knowledgeable and aware of all their purchases and all their lifestyle? Is that reasonable to ask of people? Or should the expectations on the manufacturers and the corporations be higher, basically?
Yeah, that really is the big debate. I don't think people should need to be super aware of these things. I think it should just be a given that what you're buying isn't causing harm to others or the planet. But in the meantime, I think if you have the capacity to be able to make the choices, and then you probably have to, because it doesn't seem like corporations are doing that. And with market pressures, you have the pressures to come from the bottom up right now, at least.
We had this, I had a class that had this literally as an assignment, one of my first year environmental science classes. The assignment was just like personal responsibility, corporate responsibility, each pick some sides, and you're going to have like a presentation debate about it.
Yeah.
And do you know what we concluded?
What?
There wasn't a conclusion. We just kind of went around in circles. I think I was on the consumer side, so I was the one saying that consumers going vegan and using mason jars and abstaining from buying food that has packaging, like that's the way to go, and that's how to make change.
Yeah.
I guess that kind of is like a historically supported opinion because, a lot of social change has tended to come from the ground up.
Yeah.
It's not usually the government saying, hey, we should change this. It's usually, in this case, what people are looking for is enough people go vegan, maybe they'll just stop mass producing meat.
Yeah.
Or, lower that amount. I like this is kind of way off topic, but I was thinking about it in preparation for this episode. The philosopher Immanuel Kant and his thing about universalizability.
Universalization?
No, universalizability.
Oh my gosh,
it's
so
a
many
word.
syllables.
I know. So it basically means, philosophy, ethics, morals. It means that when you are making a decision, be it a purchasing decision or just a decision in life, one of the questions you should ask yourself is, would it be okay if everyone did the same thing? So for instance, in this conversation, we eat a decent amount of meat.
Yeah.
We say, would it be okay as North American middle class citizens, would it be okay if everyone in the world, all 8 billion of us, ate this amount of meat?
It's a strong no.
If universalizing it, so if in this thought experiment you have everybody doing it, and if that doesn't turn out well, so for instance, if the emissions cause climate change are going to overdrive, and because there's being so much even more meat produced, and there's 8 billion people eating like that, then you shouldn't make the decision, meaning then you shouldn't eat that much meat. I think the issue with this kind of thinking is that I don't think you can expect realistically people to do that, make or think like that for in every facet of their life and in every choice they make.
Yeah, because sometimes you have to be a bit more not have to, but people
are selfish.
Need to be selfish at some points. It's like
no one has the time to be always thinking about these things. No one has the time, effort, willpower, our lifestyle should be structured towards these things anyway. I always think about recycling, because some things come into households, are used, and then are being thrown out. And, well, sure, you can recycle it if you spend 45 minutes breaking it down into each of its individual plastic, paper, things like that.
Yeah.
But I always wonder, can we expect consumers to realistically do that? Isn't it good enough that when they get whole plastics, whole papers, those go in the correct bins?
Yeah.
Can we then
expect them to divide it up?
Yeah. It's kind of...
Sorry, and wash everything.
It's a question of how big a role should sustainability play in our active lives. So how much should we actively be thinking about this in our lifestyles? Yeah,
it's hard. I would argue a lot. It's the most pressing issue right now. Yeah. But we can't expect people to. It's been since the 70s that we've been saying, the climate has changed so drastically that there's going to be irreversible impacts to people all over the world. People are going to die. There'll be wars over this. If that's not making people make sustainable choices, I literally don't see what could, unless it came from corporations.
I mean, we're both kind of in the epicenter of the group that would be all about consumer responsibility.
Oh, 100%.
Because we're undergrads on campus, so everywhere we look, there's
the side eye you would get if you had a plastic water bottle.
Oh, of course. Oh, no, you'd be...
probably be kicked out.
Yeah,
I had a teacher once who said, if you bring a plastic disposable water bottle to the class, I'm kicking you out.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So it's a pretty unanimous culture on campus.
Yeah.
So for those people, of course, it plays a huge active role in their decisions and in their lives.
And as a lot of them will be future leaders or influential, they're going into the mindset they're going to start businesses or do whatever. They're going to be personal responsibility is
which is a good
the
thing.
way, which is good and kind of necessary for
right
now.
I don't think there's any negative to someone going completely vegan, zero waste, something else, some other third thing.
Only riding their bike.
I don't think there's any negative to that. You can never say, negative. Oh, he's doing that too much. I mean, people get grouchy about it, vegans and whatever.
It doesn't make any
but
sense.
It's completely groundless.
Yeah.
It's only good.
They're doing the universalizable
thing. The question is, should that be expected of everyone?
I just don't think everybody can. If you
a lot of people financially can't.
That's what I mean.
I think that's a gap of awareness in places like
universities.
universities,
Yeah,
and
they don't
with,
think
with
about
people
it.
like academics, because they're usually pretty well off.
Yeah.
And so there isn't too much, or there's a lot of assumptions about like, oh, well, why don't more people just go to their local markets and buy local food and all this stuff? Like,
It's like
it's
because
ridiculous.
an apple is $3
Yeah,
more
it's like
expensive
because
there.
it's so expensive, and most people don't have the money to, that's not the priority.
Yeah, but there are, for food at least, and I think clothing, there are solutions, but they need to be made more widely accepted. Like, for example, food waste, as I was mentioning earlier. There's so much of it thrown out, and a lot of farmers are willing to donate it. There seems to be institutions that collect it and distribute it to those who are less.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversations about that kind of thing now, so it's happening.
It is.
However slowly.
Yes. It just is so much more expensive if you're going to buy it. Like, if the only way you know how to shop is to go to Superstore or whatever and buy something, you have to go to the organic section if you want to buy sustainably, I guess, or the organic, yeah. But it's like things are just so much more priced. But we were discussing, like, why is that the case? If something, I don't see why a pack of Gushers is cheaper than...
You don't see why some junk food is cheaper than...
Fresh fruit,
some candy.
especially organic fruit. Like, you got an $8 bag of grapes or a $2 pack of Gushers. Like, in my head, I was always so confused. I was like, this went through processing. There's packaging. There was development of the recipes.
Mm-hmm.
There's the colors you have to buy and all the different things. And the processes that go into that. How on earth could this be more expensive or less expensive than an apple, which all you had to do is plant a seed, water the seed, pick it. Like, there's no packaging, there's no crazy new processes that had to be innovated. I was very confused about that, but I mean, it does make sense when you actually think about it.
You think about it, because the Gushers are just literal plastic.
Yes, the per kilogram ingredients are way less expensive.
Yeah, of course.
And the labor to make those is pretty minimal. You just throw it in a machine, there's millions of Gushers being made. But with apples, you have to have somebody monitoring them, looking at the pests, making sure that everything is doing its thing.
And it's healthier, so it's worth more.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about corporations and their responsibility. And
yes, so
there's been a big legal wave across many countries about the single-use plastics. Big media storm about plastic bags in stores, all those kind of things.
Which is good. It's another case of, like,
it's just a good thing.
I'm not mad that that's happening.
Of course.
Like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's such bigger issues.
I think it's kind of, people put their attention on that because it's an easy fix.
It is, and especially for corporations, just be like, yeah, we'll stop making plastic bags. It'll actually save us money for the most part. Like, they don't have to pay for them. I
don't think media or regular people really want to think about the actual unsustainable mechanisms in play. It's probably easier to just look at a surface level issue like single-use plastics rather than looking at the
oil industry
culture around those things.
I see.
Yeah. So what I'm talking about is kind of the difference between making a big deal out of Starbucks serving, or Starbucks using plastic cups or something like that, versus, like, maybe there shouldn't be a Starbucks in the first place in society.
Yeah, no one wants to even think about that.
Traditional car companies pushing out their new electric models, and that being an example of the corporations having the responsibility.
Yes.
And that's something that was entirely driven by consumer interest, right? Consumers started buying electric cars, even though no one thought they would, because they were more expensive. And at the time anyway, it's come along pretty well, but there was a litany of issues with those cars compared to regular ones.
Yeah.
And purely by the purchases and the popularity of Teslas and things like that, now the other car companies are saying, oh, geez, efficiency is something that consumers care about. So that's something that they're going to push for. It's kind of what people, I guess, if you're being very pure about it and optimistic about it, that's how it should work, is that that's why they say voting with their wallet. It's kind of like a government and a party platform, is that it should represent what people care about. And that's why we mentioned fair trade in the little introduction. That was something that it was deemed, or that it was observed that consumers cared about, is the fair trade coffee. And
chocolate
and all those things.
Yeah.
So more fair trade labels started popping up.
Yep.
Whether corporations are kind of abusing those labels and whether they're actually abiding by those kind of fair trade parameters is another conversation. But
yeah,
it's just an example of the cause and effect, which we would hope is possible for all environmental products, right?
right.
Let's talk zero waste,
Yes,
which is something that's entirely consumer responsibility.
It is entirely, because I mean, you have to make the choice if you're gonna go.
That is a big lifestyle decision. There's a lot of people saying who just try it for a year, right? Or a month,
because
or
like there's
something
so
like that.
many things that you don't even think about.
I can't fathom it.
Of,
Probably should have researched this before we did the episode, but I can't fathom, like, I just don't know how zero waste would work whatsoever.
I think you would have to have a pretty much vegan diet.
Oh yeah, well, food-wise it could be done because most towns and city centres anyway now will have a local bulk place where you can just bring your own packaging.
Yeah, and even like just chain grocery stores, they always have a bulk section.
Yeah, but not for everything. Not for meat.
Not for everything, no.
Not for things like
but
that.
you can, they have the counters, like they have the meat counter, the bakery.
That's right.
And you can technically bring your own container and
Yes.
say, hey, weigh this. They'll look at you and they'll be like, you are crazy. But you can do it, so it's like...
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's not even that radical anymore. If someone says, like, I have zero waste, there's not too many eyebrow raisers, I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, there probably are. I wouldn't know. I'm not zero waste. But the reason it baffles me is not food-wise, but things like just things breaking. I don't know how... Say you have a pen that breaks. So what
I don't think that's... It's not so comprehensive. It's not
I thought it was. I thought it was literally like, I'm not producing any trash.
But I mean, if something is broken down to the point that you can't use it anymore,
Mm-hmm.
they would always be the people that would like repair their clothes, repair their things to the best of their ability. But if your pen runs out of... Well, they probably wouldn't own a pen in the first place.
I see. So it would be about buying things which
yeah, it's
can't...
like a refillable pen, like something like that. But if, say, your hair elastic was to break and you couldn't fix it, like, nothing's going to happen. Like, they're producing so much less waste than other people. They're not going to... Like, it's not an issue.
They
just
lose
would
my respect.
recycle it.
They lose my respect.
They probably recycle it.
You can't call yourself zero waste if you produce any kind of waste.
0.01% waste.
Let's just cycle back to our personal opinions. So the next 5 minutes will be like our soapbox. Don't worry about being politically correct or being respectful to both sides. Where do you stand on this? Because I like to do some things that are unsustainable.
What are those, Aaron?
I eat a lot of meat.
You do.
I've tried, Alicia knows I've been thinking about switching up the diet.
Vegetarian
Saturdays. Yeah, we have vegetarian Saturdays now. I don't eat meat on Saturdays. Alicia does.
It's hard for him.
It whips me into a frenzy, but that's probably just because I've been raised on it. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to start.
Well, I thought it'd be a good way to... What do you mean to start?
To see the alternatives.
I just thought if anything, it's reducing my meat intake by 1/7. Yeah,
True.
it's better than nothing.
Nothing.
Oh yeah, on the universalizability of meat eating. Because that's just the thing I'm most familiar with because a lot of people talk about it now. It's like, I like to think in a perfect world, what would we all be doing? And I don't think in a perfect environmentally sustainable world, I don't think everyone would have to be vegetarian.
No, I think it would just be having a balanced diet where meat is the lowest.
I think it would be a reduced intake.
For sure.
But I don't think everyone would be vegetarian.
No, that makes sense. Because the diets of the world that are like really held up as sustainable and healthy, they still consume meat.
Like which?
Like the Mediterranean diet, for example. Japan.
A lot of rice and sushi.
Just like the meat it's a meal centered around vegetables and grains, and then the meat is usually more just for flavor and for texture, but it's not like a steak and then you have some sides. It's like...
Well, I'm saying I think that can be possible.
I don't know.
I'm saying I don't think meat has to be like a tiny little thing on the plate. I just think if it's the star of the dish, to get into MasterChef vocabulary, if it's the star of the dish, then that shouldn't be every dish. So I'd say, you're having more meat for dinner that day? Don't have it for the next 2 meals, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I think I might be a victim of a very meat-heavy childhood because I don't really feel full or satisfied on potatoes and beans.
You really don't.
Why is this so weak?
I thought it'd be good.
Governments is another important actor which we haven't really mentioned so far, because those are key to what we call corporate responsibility, which is not just corporations chasing profit by going more sustainable, pushing electric cars, that kind of thing, because that's where the market is going and that's what people want. It's also coming from above them, which is governments and their regulations, so environmental regulations and that kind of thing. Because
in some industries, it needs to be catalyzed because corporations are completely liable to their shareholders. So if they're going to do something that's going to reduce their profits, like they legally cannot do that.
Right.
So it would have to be, there's that aspect. So the government would have to put a regulation on so that everybody in that industry would just be coming down, would have these short-term costs, and then eventually they'd recover, as it would almost certainly be the case for these massive corporations. But if they were to say you all have to use 100% renewable energy, there'd be a big upfront cost for every single person in the industry. But then they'd overcome that and they would rise back up. But if one company was like, oh, I'm going to go complete renewable energy, one, they would fall behind because
so
they would have those costs and they would, it's illegal.
What's the word for that? It's like the first mover. The first mover detriments.
Yeah, because in most industries,
like no one wants to be the first mover, basically.
Yeah. Because then somebody else will come and get your product and they'll do it better.
Yeah. And they'll do it cheaper and they'll do it
cheaper
because they won't care about emissions or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, governments doing this is, I think it's interesting because the topics and the headlines and maybe the stories that interest me are the ones that involve both corporate responsibility and consumer responsibility. So not even just in a cause and effect, consumers want this, so companies do this. Not even that, which is like the basic wish, I think, of most environmentalists, but also, so for instance, we were talking about governments regulating. They wouldn't do that on their own accord. They would do that because
people were pressuring them to.
Because people have been pressuring them by voting green or by voting for an environmentally conscious cabinet. Yeah. So that's another point towards consumer responsibility, because a lot of people politically and environmentally will say, I don't have any power. That, people, let's say people who don't vote in elections might say, not everyone can, the people who don't choose to vote, who choose not to vote in elections might say, well, what's my vote going to do anyway? There's millions of people, it's going to be a drop in the ocean. It won't do anything. That's kind of like the same people whose maybe their argument against or their argument for buying meat is saying, well, if I stop buying meat, what's that going to do? It's just it's still going to be made, it's still going to be on the shelf, I just won't be eating it. But I think it does matter. And especially because those people in such an argument will usually deliberately reduce or deliberately downplay their possible influence. So for instance, politically, they'll say, all that's possible is one vote. When we know that's not all that's possible. You can go knock on people's doors, you can lobby, you can, call other people, you can get your friends involved, all that stuff.
The exact same with lifestyle changes. You can inspire the people around you if you stop doing
that's kind of the meme about the really vocal vegan.
Yeah, right? But I mean, like,
my roommate's vegan, he's cool.
He is. But I mean, like, if you genuinely believe in something, you're gonna be advocating for it.
Of course.
No matter what it is. If you really like something, you're gonna tell everybody about it. If you're really passionate about the environment and you're like, oh, I can't do anything. Yes, you can. If you actually do something about it, then you can make a bigger change.
I think for those people, it's two things. It's despair, so it's a legitimate sadness, that oh, I can't do anything. How am I supposed to change these big systems and stuff? Yeah. Or it's kind of a deliberate avoidance of any kind of responsibility of their own. I'm gonna keep eating meat because I can't change the meat industry. Not to obviously call out those people. I was just speaking from experience because I've been in both those camps before.
Yes. And I think saying people's individual, what's the word?
Choices? Agency?
Agency. You can also, if you're saying these corporations are doing such a garbage job, shoot for the stars and try and start some kind of
Start a really environmental kombucha company.
Yes, give people alternatives, I think. Try and build these new systems to kind of go around the current ones. I kept using food waste as an example, but I mean...
I wonder why that is.
I don't know.
Alicia is involved in a food waste diversion project, which almost exactly aligns with what she was talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I was also in a competition yesterday. We were given a case and we had to like solve it, and it was this food waste charity, and we had to discuss how they could divert more waste and generate revenue and all that jazz. That's why my mind keeps going there, but I'm going to use that example anyway. If you go out and you start contacting farmers and you say, hey, like, obviously the farmers don't want to be wasting their product. Like, they're usually very committed to it. To say, hey, I'm starting this charity and we're going to be collecting food waste, things that supermarkets don't want to buy, and we're going to be distributing it to people who currently don't have access to healthy food options. They're going to say, cool. And then you can do that and be providing for people that are less able to kind of vote with their dollar, and at the same time you're diverting waste. And there's a lot of other alternatives, starting a thrift store, starting a zero waste store. There's lots of options. And I think people don't give themselves enough credit.
Be the change you want to see in the world.
Who said that?
I don't know.
Gandhi.
Maybe.
I think. I don't know why I asked.
I don't trust
this quote.
Yeah, I don't trust when it says, like, if I learn that a quote is supposedly attributed to someone, I just assume that it's the internet lying to me. I don't trust it. Anything else you want to talk about? Personal responsibility? Are you going to go vegan now?
I'll consider going vegetarian.
You don't have to. It's what we should say to people. You don't have to go vegan. Maybe just slow it down a bit. And remember that transition into eating less meat. What we learned about is like 4 legs, 2 legs, no legs.
Yeah.
So 4 legs meaning cows and sheep and pigs. Go from that to 2 legs, which is chicken and turkey and birds, which are generally have a lower carbon footprint, to no legs, which is like fish and snakes, I guess.
If that's your vibe, yeah. That's a great idea. Yeah. Because I mean, like, if you think I can't do anything, we're here to encourage you to say you can.
Sure.
We're not perfect.
No.
We don't always follow this philosophy, but we would definitely like to.
Yes.
Yes. And there was one more thing that we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
And it's kind of abstract, kind of just focused on the theory, less on the
exact environmental
it's not really an environmental issue.
Okay.
But we were talking about Disney.
Oh yeah, Disney Plus.
Disney Plus.
Are you going to get it?
No.
No.
I don't want
You already have Netflix.
Yeah. Anyway, we were discussing how, like, they have such a monopoly on the movie industry.
Oh my goodness.
Like, if you go to the theater...
Well, I can only imagine people listening and saying, that's not a monopoly because there are other companies. A monopoly is when it's just one company. Let's just say...
We know what a monopoly is.
So that kind of pedantic response, we would just say, not a monopoly, but definitely a kind of scary amount of power over what's playing and when. For instance, Disney movies are, let's say Marvel movies are announced up to what, 2 years?
They're like crazy in advance.
So let's say there's this movie which is like set to release on November 14th, 2020, or next year.
Yeah.
And it's a big Disney movie, and everyone knows, okay, that movie's going to make billions. It's going to be huge. What it means is, by them having like a huge effect on the box office, it means that other companies, Warner Brothers, whoever, will say,
I guess I can't. Independent people.
Especially those will just say, well, I guess we can't launch then. I guess we can't release then.
And it's really unfortunate when somebody's been working on a movie for 6 years, they have a release date in mind, and they go to the theaters and they're like, hey, like, we're going to release it this day. And they're like, no, you're not.
Well, yeah, sometimes Disney, sometimes it's not even that kind of indirect thing. I remember I was watching Quentin Tarantino when he made The Hateful Eight, which I think might have been 2015 or 2016, was talking about it. And he had his movie, it was a Christmas release, and it was going to be played in this big old historic theater in LA.
Yeah, and it was his dream to have a movie
played
there.
in this theater, and The Hateful Eight's release was this big, it wasn't just a typical movie thing. He was trying to take it back to the old days when going to the cinema was a big event, and there was
like live music and stuff, right?
I think at this screening there would have been, and there was an intermission, things like that, and he was getting dressed up and all that stuff. And he was contacted by, I think it was either the theater or by Disney themselves, and just said, like, no, we're playing Star Wars instead.
Yeah, and it was already planned to be released, but then Star Wars was like announced or whatever.
Yeah,
they're like, no, that's going there.
Well,
sorry.
On the theatre's behalf, you would say, well, that movie's probably going to make more money.
Yeah.
For them, so it's just unfortunate. But what do we want to say about this? Oh yeah, goes into because we were talking about consumer responsibility.
Like, can you blame somebody for buying a ticket to Avengers?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Question.
If people enjoy that universe, can we blame them for going to see Avengers 25?
Yes.
In my teenage years, I definitely blame those people and would say, look at these guys lining up for corporate Disney. How dare they? But now I think most people, like we were saying, just don't want to be thinking about that. They don't want to be thinking about, is it right for me to buy this ticket and support this thing? And some people are just like, I like these characters, so I'm gonna go watch this movie.
Exactly.
So should the onus instead be on the government to say to these huge media companies, because we all know the stats about media all being controlled by like 6 companies and all this stuff, and Disney's one of them, and them buying Fox and just like the collection of intellectual properties which might be characters at Disneyland just keeps on growing and all this stuff. Should it be on the government's agenda to say to kind of stop these huge mergers from taking place? Maybe. I don't know.
It's a big question, because like this.
But it worries me. I definitely think about it. Like I like movies a lot. Like,
but it's like if you want to make a movie someday, it's like, I don't know. I always would fear that with a lot of industries. It's like, how on earth am I going to break into the fashion industry or make a food product people actually want to buy? Because and it's just so hard to avoid that kind of the mass gravity of Disney, and even just thinking about it, like how many big popular actors and directors popular with young people are not signed up or have not participated in a Disney movie in like the last 5 years. I think it's pretty few. Yeah. And also, let's say you do manage to make that. Let's say some random person does manage to break into the movie industry with a cool company, and they're making really good movies, like Pixar, and then they just get bought, that kind of thing. So it's very difficult to survive in this kind of and I think that's why people have a hard time being like using their agency to make a change, because they're like, even if I do make this really cool company, it's probably going to be bought.
It's disheartening.
It's a hard time. Yeah.
On that note, do we want to end on a more optimistic note? Do we want to say something a little bit more optimistic?
Yeah, we can talk about... let's talk about...
Recycling?
The trend toward recycling?
No, what were you saying?
I was going to say thrift shopping, because that's one thing that I'm kind of like, this is cool, but because it's such a big trend, at least in our area,
I think everywhere with young people. I think Macklemore did it. I think he really brought it into vogue.
Yeah, with that song.
Yeah, he's a bit of a visionary.
You're right. So that's really cool to me that the thrifting industry is becoming a really big thing.
It makes everyone look like kind of a patchwork of
it's cool
of previous decades.
Because it makes me mad when everybody looks the same, and I'm like, yo, you have no identity. So it's cool when people, because I mean, no one's not going to identify themselves with their clothes, so it's cool when you can go and you have no limits. You can look at all the decades, all the brands that have ever existed, and you can pick what you like. That's cool to me. Big fan of it. Anyway,
find us
for listening. Find us on Instagram at @the_environmental, or just look up the Environmental Podcast. We post inspiration. We post ideas from the podcast. We post
behind the scenes images, some of our own thoughts. New episodes on iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud every Monday.
Yeah, thank you for listening.